So good day, everyone. It is so great to be here speaking with all of you, and I really appreciate you all turning up on your Thursday evening so that we can talk about what I think is the most important topic in the world, which is how do we achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, the world's to-do list. And I love a good to-do list. My entire life is run by my to-do list, so I really appreciate the process that has given us this fantastic comprehensive to-do list of what we've got to do to save our civilization and create a better future for all of us. And what I want to talk to you about today is not about any one of the goals, but about how we can increase the pace of innovation to achieve all the goals. When I'm forced to, there we go, missing my words. When I'm forced to pin us onto one of the goals, sometimes you go to events that name the goal that your company is working on. And, we work across all the goals, as Yaz was saying, because we are about empowering social innovators to help you identify the solutions that you need for your communities, and then to get those solutions out there into the world to test and prove whether they can work or not, and then hopefully, if they do work, to scale them for greater impact. And so in some ways, I think that's an overlay on the goal. When I'm forced to pick just one, I'm grateful for that weird, doesn't fit with the others, goal 17, partnerships for the goal, which is clearly not really a goal, because that's a process. That's a process piece, not an outcome. But that's where we sit. And a lot of the work we do is partnering with other organisations, existing businesses and foundations and governments to help them more effectively support and inspire grassroots innovators in order to accelerate our progress towards achieving these goals. And in thinking about innovation, I want to put that in context with, I think, some of the big picture trends that are happening in the world today. And in particular, I want to talk about three things that I think are going on that are the kind of ever-present context for this global challenge of achieving the goals before we run out of time. And so kind of what's going on around us? We're here working away at our to-do list, but the world around us matters, of course. No plan generally survives contact with reality. Or as Mike Tyson put it, everyone's got a plan until you punch them in the face, which I think is like the best quote on entrepreneurship I've ever heard. So there's three things that I think are going on around us that we need to be aware of, and I think are the context within which we are striving to increase the pace of innovation, or have increased the need for innovation. The first thing I want to talk about is speed, then needs, and then feeds. So speed. I think the most important change. My graphic design's terrible, isn't it? Apologies. Somehow that's. I think one of the most important changes in the world today is the pace of change itself. Things didn't used to change this much. I think it's really easy for those of us who live in this moment in the early 21st century to take change for granted. But change is actually quite a new concept. It wasn't very long ago that change simply didn't occur at an observable speed. Things did change, of course, but not at the pace of a human lifetime. So if I was born, in a village in France, and my dad was a blacksmith, I was almost certainly, I was like 99% likely to spend my entire life in and around that village and to become a blacksmith. And that was most lives in most parts of the world. You'd grow up into a particular context, and that would continue to be your context for more or less the entirety of your life. And then it would probably be your kids' context as well, and probably their kids' context as well. So this entire idea of change is actually quite radically new. The fact that we now talk about change, that we think about change, and that we take change for granted, that we all assume that the future is going to be different than the present, that's really new. That is, in and of itself, a profound change. And this pace of change has, of course, challenged us in so many dimensions. Everything is changing around us. There's more of us than there ever were before. We're more connected than we were, and everything is always changing, whether that's technology and through technology, the way in which we educate ourselves, the way in which we work, the kinds of jobs that are available. And so this has created an urgent innovation imperative. We can't choose whether to innovate or not. It's not a choice we have. Innovation is going to happen, change is going to happen. And so it's incumbent upon us who care about the future and care about the lives of people beyond ourselves and future generations and the wider biosphere to be proactive in creating the changes that we need rather than simply letting change happen to us. And so the innovation imperative is the idea that the things that were proven to work yesterday are not going to work tomorrow. We can't assume they're going to work. We have to assume they're not going to work. Therefore, we need to create a new solution today. And this solution also, it might work tomorrow, but it won't work the day after tomorrow. So we better already start working on the next solution as well. So while we need to, of course, create all sorts of breakthroughs in all sorts of issues, as a community, as an ecosystem, as a civilization, and particularly those of us who care about the social dimensions and the environmental dimensions of our civilization, any one innovation is not enough. Any one piece of breakthrough or technology or approach is not enough. We need to build a skill set around innovation itself. And as a community and as a sector, we need to get better at innovation. We need to get better at understanding the trade-offs that innovation requires. And so when it comes to social innovation, how do we fund it? Because innovation is hard, innovation is uncertain. Innovation involves risks, innovation involves failure, innovation involves the possibility of waste. I would say it's not really waste because it's learning, but that's the whole issue, that setbacks are often seen as waste. And the truth is, when it comes to social innovation, we largely don't fund it at all. And the reason for that is because people want to support things that already work. And that's natural. I've met a lot of people who are in the fortunate position to have access to some amount of resources or leverage over some amount of resources that they have the mandate to use for social impact. They work for a foundation, or they're a high net worth individual themselves, or working in government, trying to do the best job they can. And everyone's always trying to do the best job they can. I've never met anyone in one of these situations like, I'm trying to create only only half the change I could be making. Everyone's trying to make the most change they can. But a weird thing has happened in the social sector, in the way that we think about how do we create the most change we can, how do we do the most good we can do, is that for so many of those funders, those people with the assets, doing the most good you can do has come to mean doing the most good you can be certain is going to happen. And so what's missing from our sector is risk-tolerant capital. And it's risk-tolerant capital that fuels almost all innovation. And I realized this when I lived in San Francisco for 2 years, and this is where StartSomeGood was born, and that's not a coincidence, because I was naturally fascinated being in San Francisco. I was living in San Francisco, working in Silicon Valley, commuting, an hour and a half on the train each day to think about these things, and eventually to somewhat start working on a startup during those train journeys. You can't leave me kind of to my own devices for very long before I start creating new companies and so on. And so I was very fascinated by, why is Silicon Valley Silicon Valley? Why is this such a hotbed of innovation and invention and entrepreneurship? And it's interesting having moved home, because I think from Australia and from most parts of the world, from outside Silicon Valley, people have really mythic ideas as to what's going on in Silicon Valley. They think it's a place where super smart people get together and do very clever things. And the truth is that Silicon Valley is the world's largest concentration of bad ideas. And literally the world's largest concentration of failed ideas. That's what an innovation ecosystem looks like. You don't get the good ideas without the bad ideas. You don't get the successes without the failures. But that's constantly what we're trying to do in the social sector. I was reminded, looking back at some previous experiences when I was in Silicon Valley, thinking about this stuff. I'd been in DC when Obama was elected, which was an exciting time for many of us. And soon after he was elected, one of the early things he did was set up the President's Council on Social Innovation. And so, those dozen of us in the capital S, capital I social innovation niche were very excited. This is going to be amazing. Think about all the cool things we're going to get to do, all the learnings we're going to have. They announced that it was going to be $50 million in grants to support social innovation. We're like, this is fantastic. We're going to get to run so many experiments, learn all sorts of cool stuff. And then they released the criteria for those grants. And the criteria literally stated that they wanted, and I quote, proven models of social innovation. Proven innovation is a contradiction in terms. There's literally no such thing as proven innovation. Innovation is literally things that we don't yet know whether they will work. A little bit after that, something might still be innovative, relatively early on, not well distributed yet, not at scale, but it's no longer innovation, because innovation is the uncertainty. Innovation isn't just the cool stuff that's working, that's innovative. But innovation is the process of figuring out what will work and what don't. So if you limit it to the things already proven to work, it's no longer innovation at all. And that is exactly where we're stuck when it comes to social innovation. People like the idea of innovation. They want to support innovation, but they hate the idea that there are risks attached to that. They hate the idea that instead of funding this thing over here, which will do some good, maybe not as much good as that is needed, but it will definitely do some good stuff. Instead, we might invest in this thing over here that is attempting to do an epic amount of good, and they might fall short, and it might not work, and oh gosh, think of what we could have done over here. The problem with this, of course, is that the world moves too fast for us to take this approach. That nothing that currently works will work in the future. It's just a matter of time. And so where's the next breakthrough coming from? Now, in Silicon Valley, they deal with that through the role of the angel investor. I'm sure you guys all know how the investment ecosystem works, but generally, angel investors investing their own money at a very early stage, generally pre-investability. One of the ironies about investability in general is that you generally need to have already raised investment to at any point be investable. If you've never raised investment, you don't have a robust model of what investment will do, which means you're not investable. Because to be investable is to have a really robust, proven model of the impact money will make on your business. And so in the social sector, we're trapped in this paradox of investability that requires investment. In the commercial sector, they overcome that through these courageous, risk-tolerant investors known as angels. Now, they're not just doing it out of the goodness of their heart, of course. They have a really easy-to-understand model that trades off risk and reward. That you can fail at 99 of your investments, but if the 100th one is Facebook, you're good. What's the equivalent of that for social change? Because that dynamic still holds. It's just harder to calculate. Business is so simple compared to social impact. Business is so simple. Every business has the same set of metrics. Everyone knows how to understand them. I don't need to know your business to be able to read your metrics, because it all comes down to profit and loss, unit economics, burn rates, and so on. Super simple, actually. And so it's very easy to calculate the difference between 99 investments that don't return anything and then one investment that returns 200x. You're up 2x over the course of those 100 investments. We need to get more sophisticated in the way we think about social change. That what is the level of social change that we would be happy to have 90 grants not make the impact we want, but the 91st grant come up with an entirely new way to make a difference for our community, or an entirely new way to educate our kids, or an entirely new way to revitalize our democracy. What's that worth to us? Because we've got to get out of the habit of only ever trying to get to first base. We've actually got to hit some home runs if we're going to save this world in time. And so I've become convinced that there's this kind of paradox at the heart of innovation as well, which again we need to grapple with more effectively in the social sector. And that idea is that good ideas look like good ideas because they're generally sensible. They're built on the status quo. They don't violate our assumptions. They're like, here's a thing, wouldn't it be cooler if it was a bit better? And you're like, that would be cool. We should make that a bit better. But great ideas are disguised as bad ideas because they break the status quo in some ways. They violate our assumptions. They challenge our beliefs. They often challenge power in some way. They plan to upend the actual structure of our society, who has power, who makes decisions, who benefits. They therefore attract opposition. They therefore attract skepticism. Most of these ideas, you'll look at them and say, that's not going to work. And most of the time, you'll be right. The problem is that none of us have that crystal ball to know what the future is going to hold and what's in fact going to work. No one is smart enough to differentiate the actually bad ideas from the actually brilliant ideas, because they all look the same. They're in that same bucket of ideas that break and violate the status quo. And the only way to differentiate the actual breakthroughs from the unlikely to work, probably not a good idea in the first place ideas, is to try things, is to run experiments. So I've somewhat cheekily been calling this Dawkins' Law. If you guys want to help me spread that, hashtag Dawkins' Law. It's a bit awkward with the grammar, but we'll get through it. And we need to get much better at understanding this in the social sector. The commercial sector gets this. Science gets this. It's really interesting, some sections of social change, we have a much greater level of commitment, which often means a much lesser focus on short-term ROI. What's the ROI on everything we've invested in cancer research so far? Should we quit? We've spent lots of money. We haven't cured cancer yet. Should we stop? Who thinks we should stop? None of you. I agree. That's because we don't subject cancer research to the same sort of short-term ROI as we do most other social impact endeavours. Why? Because we have a commitment to get rid of cancer, to defeat cancer. We're going to do it not because it is easy, but because it is hard. We're going to do it not because it provides a short-term ROI, but because it is a goal of our civilization that we are going to defeat this scourge. We should have the exact same approach to homelessness, to education, to our democracy. We simply need to fix these things, and we need to keep going until we do. So the second thing, and I need to move on, is as part of our change relationship, our change relationship with change, we have different beliefs about what we need to lead a fulfilling life. And so we have an increasing need for purpose and impact in a way that previous generations simply didn't. Change is happening before our eyes constantly, and so now we see it as something that we are swimming in. that we have influence over, that we can participate in. This, of course, is something that emerges in a post-scarcity world. While there's still far too much scarcity in the world today, it's very different from what it looked like even 100 years ago. And so, to get all Maslow's hierarchy of needs on you, this is the kind of thing that emerges, of course, when we are no longer hungry. When you're hungry, it's really hard to think about higher purpose. You're pretty focused on how to get less hungry in the short term. When you haven't got lights, you're focused on how to get lights. But as we move beyond these, we begin to think about what's actually my higher purpose. Why am I here? What's the impact I want to have on my life? And again, this is new. No one used to ask these questions, and it's very new in some places. In China, this idea of what's my purpose is about 1 generation old. 2 generations ago, this wasn't a question in their culture, and now is. For us, it's like 1.5 generations old, 2 generations. And so it's kind of been a three-step shift. We didn't used to believe that change really happened, and then we began to believe that change did happen, but it was only special people that brought about change. It's like revolutionaries and inventors and presidents and prophets. These are the people who bring around significant change. But now we've realized that actually change is the aggregation of all of our decisions. And so it's not just that change is brought about by decisions, it's that it's brought about by my decisions. That the decisions I make every day are having an impact on the world around me. And what do I want that impact to be? And we can see this. This is not something that's emerged in the younger generations. Generational theory is BS. Generations are not magically born with different values or cultures. They reflect the changing values and culture in our wider society. And they reflect them most strongly because they haven't been imprinted with the previous culture and approach. And so you do see this most strongly with young people. And you see the evidence, and by young I mean kind of my age and down. And you see this everywhere. You see this in an organisation like Escape the City, which has gone from 6 friends in a pub in London 8 years ago to almost 1 million members around the world seeking purposeful and meaningful work. You see this in the fact that 1,000 people applied to be the receptionist at Donors Choose in New York, foregoing the kind of bonuses and stock options they could have had in startups to actually work for an organisation creating a really meaningful impact. You see it in this incredible Deloitte study that said the number one reason that new graduates leave their first job in under 5 years is a lack of alignment around the purpose of that organisation. The number 2 reason is they hate their boss. Has anyone ever had a boss they hate? Can I see a quick show of hands? Because I have. Think about that. When you have a boss that you do not get along with, that you don't feel like respects you, it's a daily agony, is it not? Like waking up every day and having to go in and see this person who doesn't respect you and isn't supporting you, and then having to do what they say. It's unbearable. So it's amazing to me that the only thing that will drive young people out of an organisation even quicker than that is feeling like the company itself has no alignment with them. And so this is what's fueling our desire to do the right thing, not just in who we work for, but who we purchase from as well. And again, this is really different. We didn't used to think this way. This idea around alignment in the present is quite new. It used to be about legacy at the end of our career. Do you guys know who this is? Anyone? This is Alfred Nobel. He funded the Nobel Peace Prize. Does anyone know how he made his money to be able to bequest the Nobel Peace Prize? Anyone? He's the inventor of dynamite. Isn't that the weirdest thing ever? That we literally find the greatest peacemakers on earth and say, here's a coin with the inventor of dynamite's face on it. Nothing else symbolises peace quite as profoundly as this dude's face. And this is how a lot of social change happened. It was legacy. It was completely bifurcated in terms of your life. You would do whatever you need to do to make a buck, invent dynamite, whatever. And then at a later point in your life, you're like, oh God, I'd hate to be known as just the guy who created the First World War. What shall I do? I better leave a more positive legacy. I'll found a peace prize. Young people don't think in terms of legacy. They think in terms of alignment. What is it that is going to express my values today? What are the things I need to do today? That's why 64% of them won't even try to work for a business that doesn't seem aligned with their purpose. So that's massive. And then the third huge change is the way in which we communicate. So the pace of change has changed, our values are shifting, and the way in which the needs that we have to lead a fulfilling life, and now the way we talk about those values has shifted profoundly as well, as we've moved from a world that's focused on interruption to a world that's focused on sharing. So it used to be, people always used to say that, word of mouth is the best marketing, but they didn't really believe that. Because if you actually looked at how people put their effort and where they spent their money, it wasn't on word of mouth, it was on interrupting people. It was, you want to watch the sport? Let's interrupt you with an ad. You want to walk down the street? Let's interrupt you with a dude in a koala suit. You want to read a newspaper? Let's interrupt you with an ad. You're doing something else, but we're going to pay to get in your face. But today, word of mouth really is the most effective marketing because it's where everyone is. Until very recently, there were only a couple of entities on Earth that could claim 1 billion adherents. The Catholic Church in China, and then more recently, India. Now we have something like 5 social media networks at 1 billion plus members. This is a little out of date. WeChat's over 1 billion, definitely. So 5 plus social media networks with more than 1 billion users at the moment. So not only is word of mouth the most qualitatively impactful, it's got the greatest quantity, the greatest reach as well. And so in this new world of sharing rather than interruption, social impact businesses are better evolved and are better equipped to survive because what they're sharing is simply more meaningful. Everything that Yasmin talks about is simply more worth sharing. When a business has a purpose that is greater than profit, it's a more interesting story. It's an automatically more interesting piece of content. It's more worth sharing. So social enterprises are like the mammals before the asteroid strike. They were already there, but at the time, the lumbering dinosaurs were better adapted. And then the climate shifted dramatically, and suddenly the dinosaurs weren't adapted to that new world, the mammals were. That's where we're at with the business world right now. Social enterprises are better adapted to this new world. They automatically are more shareable, more in tune with their communities. And I think you can see this most profoundly with the most boring products. Have any of you guys ever been to the supermarket, bought some toilet paper, got home and thought to themselves, I have got to share the fact that I just bought some toilet paper. My friends are going to love this. Let me get a photo. You know who does do that? People who gives a crap toilet paper. You couldn't find a product that's more boring than toilet paper, but Who Gives a Crap makes toilet paper interesting because they're about more than just the toilet paper. In some ways, the allure of this can even distract us, that we can think we're doing a pro-social thing by buying a particular brand of bottled water when, of course, the need is to not buy bottled water at all. So in some ways, this purpose, making impact, negative impact products seem more beneficial is one of the tricks of the new marketing. But it is really powerful the way in which we get our audience to share for us. And so this is what's driving the rise of business for good. And when you look at these 17 goals, they're not just social challenges, they're profound business challenges as well. So I'm going to wrap up, but I just want to give a couple of examples of the role that businesses can play. Because it's not just about inventing the future, it's about leveraging the assets we have to create the future that we want. And that doesn't mean that if you're an existing organisation, whether that's what you work for government or a foundation or an existing company, you don't always have to be the innovator, you don't always have to be the inventor. It's about thinking about how to align your resources with the impact you wanted. And that can be through partnership. I love the alliance between the Good Guys and Orange Sky Laundry, Australia's #1 deliverer of impact using white goods. This incredible partnership between Adidas and Sea Shepherd to make new shoes out of recovered drift nets. It could be as simple as letting startups use your spare office space. If you have an office in central London, space is expensive there, get some cool startups under your roof, like Friends of the Earth are doing. And now you get to rub up against these incredible innovators at almost no cost, a little bit of extra electricity, having them use some spare space. Or CPA, running Australia's best what do they call this? Not disability tech, ability tech? Anyway, Australia's best accelerator for startups working in the disability and accessibility space. And it's a lot of the work we do today with people like ING, helping them support early stage startups through matched funding mechanisms like the Dream Starter program. And they've actually measured the commercial impact of their work supporting early stage social enterprises at 21x what they spend on it. It is literally the most impactful marketing they do, is their investments in early stage social enterprises. It's more impactful than those TV ads with Isla Fisher. So it's genuine shared value. They share their values by working with the grassroots innovators. And it can be foundations as well. So the challenge I want to put out to all of you guys is it's really important to be a conscious consumer, to support these social enterprises that are emerging, but it's not enough. We need conscious entrepreneurship to actually invent better products, not just to select amongst the limited range of ethical products that exist, but to invent the new products that we need, the new approaches. In some cases, the non-products that will help us actually avoid consumption rather than promoting more consumption. And so we need all of you guys not just to be doing the right thing when you're in the shop, but thinking about how to use your talents, your entrepreneurship, and your creativity to actually help us build the future that we need. And if you're ready to get started, we would love to help you. Thank you for having me.